result of the Aveda from below. Because Moshe is already experiencing that level of revelation. And so, certainly for Am Yisrael, there's a tremendous difference, an unbelievable change in their reality. For Moshe, there's no change. We talked about that at length. And the Rebbe explains that Moshe is the Rei Yisrael, and the Chiddush is that the Rebbe says, the Rebbe uses words that are really quite astounding, that all the milas of Moshe Rabbeinu, the greatness of Moshe Rabbeinu, the holiness of Moshe Rabbeinu, the fact that Moshe Rabbeinu is shaykh to Das Elyon, and the shorish of Das Elyon is Atik, it's still right there, hovering above Kalman. It's Kalman's Makif. That's your Makif. Now you have to bring it into Pneumius. That's the whole. So that's who Moshe is. But and the Rebbe said the words of the Rebbe. I mean, no one would say this if the Rebbe hadn't said it. That's all Tofel, secondary, and that's the Chitzenius of Moshe. Only the external expression of Moshe. The Pneumius of Moshe is Yisrael and Yisrael. It's the shepherd of the Jewish people. And what does that mean? We talked about that, but it's important to understand and important to internalize. What does that mean? The Pneumius of Moshe Rabbeinu is your welfare. Your physical, emotional, spiritual welfare. That's what Moshe Rabbeinu is all about. Unbelievable loftiness and holiness and tzidkus and amazing and incredible and this story and that story and what we can't say about Moshe Rabbeinu. But what's Moshe Rabbeinu's zikr? Caring for every single Jew in the world. That's who Moshe really is. And therefore, if the Yidden are lacking, and Moshe's and the Aveda brings about a filling of that lack, so then, just as it affects the Yidden, it affects Moshe. We had that problem that we asked, wait a minute, if Moshe is lacking because the Jewish people are lacking, so then it's not Tfilas Ashir. And we answered that based on what it says in Tefillah, in the Mayanot Tefillah L'Moshe. We talked about that yesterday. Okay, Yud Beis. Now the Rebbe connects everything we've learned in this Maimer to Yud Beis Tammuz and Yud Tes Kislev. As we recall, at the beginning of the Maimer, the Rebbe also mentioned that the Alter Rebbe would have been saying that the Mizmor Tefillah L'Moshe on Yud Tes Kislev. Why? If you divide Tehillim up according to the month, which is how we say it, so what's the first capital you say on the 18th of the month? The Tefillah L'Moshe. So the Alter Rebbe also said Tefillah L'Moshe, in addition to Pada B'Shalom. So we sing the song of Pada B'Shalom, but also Tefillah L'Moshe. So the Rebbe is now going to connect all of this to Yud Beis Tammuz and Yud Tes Kislev. Now the Ikar obviously is Yud Beis Tammuz because the Rebbe is saying a Maimer on Yud Beis Tammuz. So too the expression of Moshe in every generation. Everything we said about Moshe above applies to all of the Rebbeim. Until the Frierdiker Rebbe. Now the Rebbe always stops at the Frierdiker Rebbe and doesn't include himself in all of this, but we Chassidim do. The inner essential reality of the Frierdiker Rebbe, who's Zeshu Rein Yisrael, is that he's the shepherd of the Jewish people. V'inyonim d'Yisrael hem inyonim d'Nasi. And those matters of the Jewish people are the matters of the Nasi. So many, even we talked yesterday about the fact that the Iker, if one were to describe the Iker of Veda of the Frierdiker Rebbe, what's unique about the Frierdiker Rebbe's Nasiya, so the Rebbe already told us. Mesiras Nefesh. And when the Rebbe started talking about Mesiras Nefesh, the first answer that we gave earlier in the Maimer as to why all of Torah's, that the Paradum is connected to, mitzvahs are connected to Moshe Rabbeinu. So we talked about Mesiras Nefesh, and Moshe Rabbeinu is the source of our Mesiras Nefesh. And the Rebbe at that point brought in the Frierdiker Rebbe. And there's no question that most of the stories are the incredible Mesiras Nefesh of the Rebbe and his Chassid. Unbelievable Mesiras Nefesh. But there's also many, many amazing stories of the care of the Frierdiker Rebbe. Rav Lezer Nanas was a Chassid who lived here in Yerushalayim. think they told us we can be calm. I hope. Okay. And all these itkunim, updates. So I hope these updates are things are calm, not things are about to get wild. Leizer Nanas was a chassid of the Rebbe Shab. He got to Temchei Tamimim, Shavuos Tafresh Ayin Gimel, when he was 15, 16, how old was he? He was in Ayin Gimel, oh come on, he was 16, right? So he got to Temchei Tamimim right before Shavuos in Tafresh Ayin Gimel, which is 1913. So if you've ever heard of the Hemshech Ayin Beis, which is sort of the pinnacle of Chabad Chassidus, Rebbe Shab's Chassidus certainly, so that those are the Maimarim he heard from the Rebbe Shab as a Bacher in Yeshiva. He spent 20 years in Siberia. There's a book about him called Subota, because Subota means Shabbos in Russian, because in those 20 years he was never Michal Shabbos. No matter what they did to him, he wouldn't do any Malacha on Shabbos. So finally they just gave up. And they used to put him, either they'd put him in a cell with the worst murderers and thieves, or they'd put him in a cell that he couldn't stand up in or sit down or lay down in, meaning he would have to crouch for 26 hours. That was his Shabbos. Amazing man, unbelievable. He ended he came to Eretz Yisrael. The Frierdiker Rebbe told him that he was going to get out of Russia and make it to Eretz Yisrael in the 30s. Last time he saw the Frierdiker Rebbe, when the Rebbe was on his way from Russia to Poland. So he Nanas saw the Rebbe, and the Frierdiker Rebbe gave him a bracha that he would make it out of Russia and make it to Eretz Yisrael, which was a ridiculous thing to tell someone in 1930. But he Baruch Hashem, he made it right after or before the 6-day war. I don't remember whether it was right before or right after. And when they built Shikun Chabad here in Yerushalayim, Leizer was still in Russia, but the Rebbe told them that they should build an apartment for Leizer Nanas on the bottom floor, on the ground floor, because he has problems with his legs, because he's getting out of Russia soon, and he'll have his apartment. That's where he lived until 1997. He passed away at the age of 99 and 9 months. When he was 70 years old, he went into the Rebbe, and he had 2 canes because his legs were gangrenous from being in the camps, and the Rebbe said, "Leizer, you look like an old man. Those canes." So he said, I'm 70 years old." The Rebbe said, "No, you're 50." So he didn't want to argue with the Rebbe. He didn't say, "No, I'm 70." So he just said to the Rebbe, "I was born in Tafresh Nun Zayin," which was 70 years before Tafshin Chaf Zayin. I was born in 1897. It's now 1967. I'm 70 years old. But all he said was, "I was born in Tafresh Nun Zayin." And the Rebbe said, "You call 20 years in Siberia living?" He lived to be 99. The Rebbe just gave him back 20 years. He lived to be 99 and 9 months. He used to learn with people. He learned with my wife once a week. I learned with him intermittently. He was a very, very famous chassid here. Everybody in those days, when I was younger, everybody had some chassid that had learned in Temchei Tamimim that they hung around with to find out what it was like in Temchei Tamimim. For me, he was that one. There were people around who had learned in Temchei Tamimim in Lubavitch with the Rebbe Shab. So, sort of wanted to, that's where the Lubavitch you and I know. That's where it started. In that yeshiva in that time, and so just to hang around. Hear stories about what went on. So one of the stories Leizer told us was when he was a bacher. So how did he support himself? The revolution had already happened. How did he support himself? So he couldn't work because he'd have to work on Shabbos, etc. So one of the things he did was raise money for the Frierdiker Rebbe for yeshivas. That was later. That's why he was sent to Siberia. But he was very proud of the fact that the official charge against him was that he tried to blow up government buildings. So he used to say, "I'm a terrorist. I'm a terrorist." He was very excited about that. That was all nonsense. He was sent for 10 years. The last week of his 10-year sentence, they made a mock trial and they kept him for another 10 years in Siberia. But he said he slept like a baby every night because the Friedrich Rebbe told him he was getting out, so he knew he was getting out, so he got out. When he was actually just it's Chav Chasivan today. It's a big day. The day that the Rebbe and the Rebbetzin came to America in 1941, got out of the inferno of Europe miraculously. It was for bringing tonight. I'm sure that will be talked about. Rav Lazer, when he was a young boy, came from Kharkov with his father, Mordechai Nanis, to the Rebbe Rashab for Yechidus. And the deal was, the farther you came, the shorter the line was to get in. So they had come 1,000 kilometers on a horse and buggy. So they got in relatively early. And the Rebbe Rashab asked Lazer to come to him. He was 5, 6, 8. He was a young boy. The Rebbe Rashab asked him to come over, and he whispered in his ear. He whispered in his ear that he asked him what his name is. First, he asked him what his name is. He said Eliezer. He said, "Oh, why? Where's the name Eliezer come from?" So, of course, Eliezer comes from the fact that the Moshe Rabbeinu says that the Eibishter saved me. He helped me. So then the Rebbe Rashab asked him to come over, and he whispered in his ear, just like the Eibishter saved Moshe's son, so too he will save you. Then the Rebbe Rashab told him to leave, and he would talk to his father. So when his father came out of Yechidus, his father asked him, "What did the Rebbe say to you?" So here was a little boy, and he said to his father, if the Rebbe had wanted you to hear, he would have said it out loud. Which is true, right? Because there were only 3 people in the room. So I asked him, well, why didn't you tell your father? He said, because now he's a little boy. He said, I understood when the Rebbe told me that I would make it out, but my family wouldn't, and I didn't want to give my father pain. Right, the Eibishter will save you. Didn't say the Eibishter will save your family. He was a little boy. He said, so I didn't tell his father. So anyway, at one point, he and another chaver from Temple Tamim had to make a living. So what was their living? They would the original investment, as in every investment in Russia, was a bottle of vodka. They started with a bottle of vodka. How they got that, I don't know, but I can't imagine that was so hard to find. They got a bottle of vodka. They would take the bottle of vodka to a soldier, and they would give him the bottle of vodka for his warm coat. Soldiers had nice warm coats. Now, the warm coat, of course, was green and was obviously army issue. So they had to dye the nice warm coat black. So they would take it to someone, dye it black, and then sell it on the black market. They'd make money for a few bottles of mashka, and then they would do this over and over again. And that's how they made their living. That's how they had money to eat. So buying the coat, meaning giving the vodka for the coat, was punishable by death. Dyeing the coat black was punishable by death, if you were caught. And selling the coat on the black market was the worst of it all, and that was punishable by death. So everything they did in terms of how to make a living, and these were 22-year-old buckram, everything they did was punishable by death, but that's what they did because they had to do that. At one point, they went to visit the Rogachover. Now you'll understand why I'm telling you all this, because of what we just read. At one point, they went to visit the Rogachover. The Rogachover was known as a very, very interesting person, and all he did was learn all day, and he had very, very long hair, actually, because he said he wouldn't take off his yarmulke long enough to get a haircut, because if he took off his yarmulke, he'd have to stop thinking Torah, and he didn't want to do that. So he had very, very long hair. And he said he was over in Isser constantly, and that was thinking about Torah in the washroom. He said he couldn't stop. So he's just over the Isser thinking about Torah in the washroom, the rubbish. So they went to visit the Rebbe Torah. It was a Lubavitch Chassid who actually, he said that, I'm sure he knew Chassidus, right? But he said he doesn't really know Chassidus because he finds it hard to learn something that he doesn't know all of it when he learns it. So Nigla, he knew all of Nigla. So learning Nigla but he didn't know all of Chassidus, so learning Chassidus was difficult for him. When he would answer the door, the Rogachover would open the door and he'd say, what's the question? What's the halachic question? And if there wasn't one, he'd say, thank you, and he would close the door. So they knocked on the door. They didn't have a halachic question. They said, Mirzayin Tmimim, we're students of Lubavitch Yeshiva. Come in, quick. What's going on? Who are you? What's your names? Where'd you learn? What are you doing? They talked for a while. And then the Rogatchover asked, how are you making a living? How are you living? How are you eating? So they explained. So the Rogatchover said, does the Rebbe know about this? So they, being Lubavitch and Bokrim, who know everything, scoffed. Of course the Rebbe knows the Rebbe's the Rebbe. What kind of silly question is that? He is, the Rogatchover, he's not as frum as us. He's not as Chassidic as us. What kind of question? I'm playing it up a little more than it was, but that was basically what happened, according to Rabbanan. So the Rogatchover is a pretty smart Jew, and he figured it out. He said, oh, you think you know who your Rebbe is? I'll tell you who your Rebbe is. And that's now you'll know why I'm telling you this story, based on what we just read. He said, your Rebbe, he's talking about the Friedrich Rebbe, your Rebbe, every night, before he goes to sleep, looks into the souls of every single one of his Chassidim. And anybody who needs any help, he does the best he can to help them. And only after that does he rest. That's what the Rogatchover said about the Friedrich Rebbe. Every night. Okay, so that's what the Rebbe just said. What was it? The Roin Shel Yisrael. And Yonim to Yisrael, I mean Yonim to Nasi. Val Pizeh. Yesh levara ilui shenischadesh bagula. Therefore, based on this, we can explain the elevation that was brought about by the Geula of Yud Tes Kislev and the Geula of Yud Beis Tammuz. Al Yedei Masar, by virtue of the imprisonment. Shehu, which is the principle of the Alter Rebbe that ended up with the freedom on Yud Tes Kislev, and the Friedrich Rebbe, which ended up in the freedom of Yud Beis Tammuz. Friedrich Rebbe was arrested and ultimately sentenced to death. That was commuted to, I think, 10 years in Siberia, which was then commuted to 3 years in a place called Kostroma, an internal exile. And the Rebbe went to Kostroma. He was let out of prison on Gimel Tammuz, which is why we celebrate Gimel Tammuz. And meaning that the Rebbe always used to forbring on Gimel Tammuz. The Friedrich Rebbe never forbring on Gimel Tammuz. Right? The Rebbe actually explained the Friedrich Rebbe didn't forbring on Gimel Tammuz because he couldn't be with the Chassidim. He was still sent to exile. Right? But by the Chassidim, the fact that the Rebbe was fine, it was and got out of jail, so that was a reason for celebration. So he went to Kostroma on Gimel Tammuz, and then on Yud Beis Tammuz, 9 days later, he was told that he could be set free. But that waited until the next day because the government offices were closed on Yud Beis Tammuz for some holiday or something. So he got the actual official paper on Yud Gimel Tammuz. That's why we celebrate Yud Beis and Yud Gimel Tammuz as the Chag Geula of the Friedrich Rebbe, which is why if you look at the front of your paper, it says, right, Yud Beis, Yud Gimel Tammuz, Tavshin, it's Chag Geula. That's what this mimer was for. So, when the Rebbe got, what was the chiddush of that for the Rebbe? Meaning, what happened to the Rebbe on that day? Okay, he got free. Now the Rebbe's going to explain things in a very interesting way. That this is a yisar na'or min ha'choshech. This is the advantage of light that comes from the dark. Meaning a revelation of light that is more powerful because it emerges from the dark. And it's not more powerful because relatively it seems brighter because I was just in a dark room. The darkness itself is what produces the more powerful light. And the mashal used for that in Chassidus is always a question. A good question. What does a good question do? So what learning Torah is all about. Learning how to ask good questions and learning how not to ask not good questions. Right? So what's a good question? So a good question temporarily plunges me into intellectual darkness. I don't understand. But what emerges in that darkness? A more powerful light, a much greater understanding once I answer the question. Right? So the question is a temporary state of darkness, but it's not that now I emerge to the same place. It just seems lighter because I was in darkness. No, it's a greater place. Because of the darkness, I now found myself in a more powerful place because of the question, which is the secret of Gullus. Gullus is the question. Geula is the answer. What emerges from the Gullus is a greater state of Elokus, and that's called Geula, and that's what the Smimers taught us. Shuki sarna or mina choshech dilachur at first glance. Cave and Shubin the Gale and the Seam. And now the Rebbe asks a very interesting question, but we know this from the Alter Rebbe, and the Rebbe is extrapolating to the Friedrich Rebbe. The Alter Rebbe told us about this. that since by the Nesim, the Rebbeim, loy shayich loymer, it's not reasonable to say, it's not relevant to say, should be yosim b'masar, that when they were in a state of imprisonment, hayal gabam, that there was by them eze inyan shel choshech, a reality of choshech, a reality of darkness. I mean, there was nothing that the Russians could do to either the Alter Rebbe or the Soviets to the Frierdiker Rebbe that would ultimately affect their relationship with the Eibishter. And as a matter of fact, the Alter Rebbe said that he was enjoying being in prison because he had no communal responsibility, and so he could just sit and learn Torah all day. And as a matter of fact, that whole famous story where the minister came in and wanted to ask the Rebbe a few questions once they found out how the Rebbe was clearly a serious person. So then the ministers of the Russian government used to come in to visit to see, who is this person that everybody's talking about down in the cellar. So the Tsar came in at one point, but the Minister of Education came in, and he asked the Rebbe, of course, a famous question. What was the question he asked?
On Rashi.
Well, no, that was the answer was Rashi. He asked the question on Chumash. Why does God ask Adam Arishan Ayeka, where are you? Doesn't God know everything? Why is he asking Adam Arishan, where are you? So the Alter Rebbe said that he was just, so to speak, entering into conversation with him to, not scare him at first before they talked about what had to be talked about, which is Rashi and Chumash. So the minister, now this is what an educated non-Jew knew in 1812, right? These were educated people, European. I mean, the Russians were based, there was the Europeans in Russia, who were very, the language that the intelligentsia spoke in Russia was not Russian, they spoke French. All those people that Tolstoy writes about, they're all speaking French to each other. He wrote about it in Russian, but they're all speaking French, right? And they were very educated people. They were, and this guy was actually religious. It's strange religion, Russian Orthodoxy, but he was religious. So he said, this is a non-Jewish Russian in 1812, said to the Rebbe, I know what Rashi says. I want to know what you say. Of course he knows what Rashi says. He's an educated person. Any educated person would know what Rashi says in the Chumash. That's what life was like. Okay, which is just fascinating, right? Now an educated person might know how to find Netflix on the phone, because he can spell Netlflix, right? That's the extent of his spelling. So, fine. So the Rebbe then, of course, told him the famous line that the Eibishter is always asking, "Where are you? What have you accomplished in life?" And then the Rebbe said, for instance, you who are 54 years old, in those 54 years, what have you accomplished? At no point, of course, did he tell him he was 54 years old. What have you accomplished in those? Have you used your time properly and accomplished that which you're supposed to accomplish? And that's the question that the Eibishter is always asking us, where are you? So he was very taken by this answer. And he left. And the Alter Rebbe explained later that answer saved him, because he was more than willing to reach a state of kloisa nefesh, of destruction of the soul. He was more than willing to reach a state like Nadav and Avihu, where his soul just left his body because he was in jail. All he was doing all day long was sitting and learning Torah, and he didn't see any reason to stay connected to Elam Haza anymore. And then he said that to the minister, and he said that convinced him that he had to fight to stay alive in jail because he had what to do when he got out of jail. So clearly, being in jail was not affecting his relationship with Kadosh Baruch Hu. So then what's the advantage of getting out of jail for the Rebbe? Now, I understand that he can go do what he understood he had to do outside of jail. We get that part. But in terms of the choshech of it, the darkness of it, what darkness? By the Rebbeim, it's not dark. So this is the same question we just asked relative to Moshe Rabbeinu, right? When the Tefillah LaMoshe, how does it affect Moshe? So the Rebbe answered it in the previous paragraph. So now the Rebbe is saying, similarly, by the Rebbeim, when they got out of jail, what changed? Now, obviously, the external circumstance changed, but in terms of Pneumius, their relationship with the Eibishter, how did it change? So the Rebbe brings, relative to the Alter Rebbe, a very, very famous idea that's our basic understanding of the story of the Alter Rebbe. That what? Kemuvan, the Rebbe says in brackets, Gam mi'asicha yadua de bala geula, also from the well-known sikh of the Frierdiker Rebbe, in the Likutei Diburim, b'nagei l'masar shel Admar Zokin, relative to the imprisonment of the Alter Rebbe, shemasar haya b'haskamasa, that the imprisonment was b'haskama, meaning he agreed to be taken, and if he didn't want to be taken, he wouldn't have been taken. That's why the first time they came to take him, so he ran away. And then why he had that interesting conversation with Shmuel Munkus when he was Chassidim, and he asked Shmuel Munkus, should I let them arrest me or not? And Shmuel Munkus said, yes. He asked, why? So he said, Mamanavshak, either way you look at it. If you're really a Rebbe, so there's nothing they can do to you. And if you're not a Rebbe, and you're just fooling us all, then you deserve it, because you've taken away our Elam Hazeh. You've taken away our ability to enjoy physical pleasure. So you deserve it. That's what Shmuel Munkus said to the Alter Rebbe. You could say things like that. He was asked in all fairness. So the Frierdiker Rebbe explained that the Alter Rebbe, we also know the story of going to the jail, right? They were driving along in the carriage, and it was Friday right before midday, and the Rebbe never wanted to travel after midday. But well, it's a problem traveling after midday, Erev Shabbos. So the Rebbe asked them to stop, if they could stop in a little town nearby, and they said no. So then, of course, a wheel of the wagon broke, and then they fixed the wheel, and they kept going, and the Rebbe asked again, and they said no, so another wheel broke, they fixed the wheel, so then they kept going, and then the horse died. So they realized there's nothing they can do about this. So they stopped, and they stopped, interesting enough, they stopped by the side of the road, and the Chassidim in Russia knew where the Alter Rebbe spent Shabbos. Where was it that he was on that Shabbos? By the side of the road. Okay, so that story sort of illustrates that if the Rebbe didn't want to go, he wouldn't have gone. And that's what the Frierdiker Rebbe says about it all. Shamaser haya b'askamasa. It was with his permission. To mizem muvan, from this it's understood. Shalagabam, relative to them, the Alter Rebbe and the Frierdiker Rebbe. He'elomis vestarim the masar, the concealments of the masar him rak b'chitzonius were only an external reality, but not in pnimius. Therefore, ech nasa al yadeza yisur and ours. So then, how is there a greater light emerging from this dark when the darkness isn't? In all fairness, the darkness isn't really dark relative to the Rebbeim. Same question we asked by Moshe. And we've seen that before when the Rebbe says those words that mean the Rebbe's going to say something that you won't find anywhere else. You might find other explanations, but you won't find this, and that's why there's also no footnote where the Rebbe says, look here in this Maimer, this Maimer. The cave and she'ikr in Yonam Shel Nesiim, that since the essential reality of the Nesiim, whose is this Shem Roy Yisrael Nesi Yisrael, that they are the shepherds of the Jewish people and the leaders of the Jewish people. Lochein, therefore, Helen vehester the Masar, therefore the concealment of the Masar, Shahaya b'Nagei Yisrael, that was relevant to the Jewish people. Who was experiencing Helen and Hester? The Chassidim. Chassidim were experiencing tremendous Helen and Hester. They couldn't see their Rebbe. They were afraid that Al Pi Teva, the Rebbe was in mortal danger. They passed the death sentence against the Frierdiker Rebbe. We've seen the paper since. The Rebbe saw the paper in jail. But the paper has been seen by Chassidim since, because those files were opened up when the Soviet Union fell. So a lot of those files have been opened up, and Yidden have seen those files. And there was a death sentence, and then it says there's like a stamp on it, Mavutel in Russia, canceled. And then 10 years in Siberia, and that was canceled, and then 3 years in Kostroma. Right? And then the Rebbe spent 9 days in Kostroma. What did the Rebbe do during those 9 days in Kostroma? He opened up a cheder for Jewish children. Why was he in jail? Why did they want to kill him? Because he was opening up schools for Jewish children. What did he do in those 9 days in Kostroma? He left Kostroma. When the Rebbe left Kostroma, there was a school for Jewish children. Didn't seem to be fazed by them too much. And he won. We're here. Where's the Soviet Union? We're here. Lubavitch is here. We're Chai V'Kayim. Here we are sitting around this table learning Chassidus about that person. Right? He's still around. Soviets, gone. Hopefully never to be heard of again. But, there's always a Bernie Sanders out there who's, trying his best. How he picks the wrong team every single time always surprises me. Once this man should be on the right side of history. Once. He's Jewish, right? He has an Efshalukis. Once in his life he should be on the right side of history. Every time, absolutely in the darkest of the darkest places, it's astounding. Right? It's Rav Steinsaltz, right? Rav Steinsaltz was asked on Nightline, which was a very famous program on American television. What was his name? Ted Koppel. So it was very, very serious program. And once Rabbi Steinsaltz, Rabbi Yisrael, was on the program, and he must have gotten an okay to ask the question. I can't imagine he would have asked the question. He asked Rabbi Steinsaltz, are Jews better than non-Jews? There's 5 million non-Jews watching this program on American television. You better be careful what you say. Right? So he said, yes. We're better at being good, and we're better at being bad. When we're good, we're the best. When we're bad, we're the worst. That is just an amazing statement. I mean, you've been in this country long enough. The worst people you will ever run into in your life are some of the people who are hanging on with their fingernails to control this country. They are evil people. They are it's hard to say this by you. They are really, really bad people. And you look around this place and you see most of the people, the most amazing, the people in this country are just amazing. What's going on here, what we've been through, and the spirit of this country, and the positivity, and it's beyond belief. And there's a small cohort of people who are trying to darken everything. My wife said that someone told her that they saw a clip on Israeli television where from one of the anti-Semitic stations. So this woman is walking around with her thing, interviewing people in Tel Aviv whose stores were just blown to bits by a bomb. So she goes up to some guy, she says, this is your store? Yeah. Oh my gosh, it looks terrible. He says, no, Baruch Hashem. Mikol Beseder. She said, well, look how terrible, your store is destroyed, and she's trying to turn this into a terrible, horrible, look how bad everything is. And he says, no, Baruch Hashem, Ani Chai, V'Bari, I'm alive, I'm healthy. This is just money, what do I care? This is my store, I'm alive, my family's alive, we're all fine, Baruch Hashem. She didn't know what to do with this guy. Like, she was trying to depress everybody watching her show, and she couldn't depress anybody, even this guy, who just had his store blown up. So that's hidden. She's, what are you going to do? Is there hope? Yes, it's called Mashiach. Him? He's a hid. No, my star blew up. Baruch Hashem, my kids are fine. My 8 o'clock are fine. My wife's fine. Everything's fine. Don't worry about it. We'll make it. He's a hid. Okay. So the Rebbe says that since the Friedrich Rebbe is all about us, therefore, what's the Helam? The Helam is by us. Right? That we were behelam. We were worried. It's not yet Gimel Tammuz, but it's pretty close to Gimel Tammuz. Gimel Tammuz isn't Helam Behester for the Rebbe. Gimel Tammuz is Helam Behester for us. We're the ones in a state of Helam Behester. It's very hard for us. For the Rebbe, it's Helam Behester. The Rebbe wants to be with us. That's clear. There's many, many stories of that in different ways. One year, the Bachen weren't allowed into the Rebbe's Seder. It's a whole long story, but I'm telling it very quickly. The Bachen weren't allowed into the Rebbe's Seder. The Bachen used to make a Seder downstairs and then run upstairs in the Friedrich Rebbe's apartment until Tafshin Lamed. The Rebbe used to make Seder by his mother-in-law. She passed away in Tafshin Lamed, so the last Seder was Pesach Tafshin Lamed, 2-star, right, every year. The Bachen would make Seder downstairs and run upstairs, and then they would be brought into the Rebbe's Seder, and they would stand around the table and be at the Rebbe's Seder. So one year there was something happened, it doesn't matter. So they weren't allowed in. So the Bachen didn't know what to do. So they should we make just a long Seder downstairs because we can't go up, or should we make a short Seder downstairs like we always do, and we'll go up and whatever happens, happens. So a couple of Bachrim were let in, and I heard this story from one of them, Fitchi Eifin, who lives in Ramat Shlomo. So there were some Bachrim who were let in, and so he was inside the whole time. And he said it when they got to Shvei Chamaska, when you open the door, right? Near the end of the Seder, throw your wrath, and the women go with the candles and open the door. And right? So they went to open the door, and what was outside? All these Bachrim, like this and like this and this, listening as much as they could through the door. So he was standing right behind, he said he was standing right behind where the Rebbe was. And the Rebbe was looking at the door. And he saw, now, the Rebbe was not the one who said they couldn't come in. Right? The Rebbe wanted, so what did the Rebbe do? He saw it. The Rebbe went to the Bachrim. Come in. He wants to be with us. Right? The Bachrim all piled in, to the chagrin of the people who wanted him not to be there. Okay, so the Rebbe had to put up with all sorts of things. Rebbe wants to be with us. Okay, but Gimel Tammuz for the Rebbe is concealment. The Rebbe just said no. It's for concealment for us. So therefore, the concealment that of the imprisonment that was relevant to the Jewish people, so that brings about a state of concealment for the Nesiim. Lochein, therefore, like we said by Moshe, the lacking by Yidden causes a lacking in Moshe. Again, we explained that in footnote 67. Well, based on that. V'lochein ba'geula ba'maiser, therefore, in the freedom from the enslavement, k'shachoshech nefach la'or, when the darkness was transformed into light, nasa yisur, or it was brought about a greater light, even by the Rebbeim. Let's go a couple more minutes and we'll stop. V'hine, nizbar le'il. The end of the Maimon is on the next page. I don't know what's supposed. No one has told me anything as to what's supposed to happen the rest of the week. I'm in the dark, just like you. Someone is not in a state of Helam v'Hester, but we are. There's no Helam and Hester by the people who run the world. Just us little folk, us plebeians down here. So I have no idea, but we'll find out, I'm sure, after it happens. V'hine, nizbar le'il, shashayches the geula, the Yud Tes Kislev, the Yud Beis Tammuz, the relevance of the geula of Yud Tes Kislev and Yud Beis Tammuz, lahamizmar tefila lameshahu, to this mizmor, because again, it's very shaykh to the Frierdiker Rebbe, and it's also something the Alter Rebbe said, who hein linyonim hapratim shenemru b'mizmar, both relative to the details that are mentioned in the Kapitel Tehillim. Now, if you remember, at the beginning of the Maimon, we talked about this. The Rebbe is explaining only the first two words of the Kapitel, Tefillah L'Moshe. Never explained Ish Elokim in this Maimon. Didn't explain any of the things that happened next. Now, it happens to be very interesting. This Maimon was said on Shabbos, so obviously we don't have a tape. But the second Mimer, called Tefillah L'Moshe, that was said during the week. Now, if you look in the edited Mimer, the Rebbe only talks about the first two words of the Kapitel, Tefillah L'Moshe, meaning the general reality, not the specifics that happen next. But in the Mimer itself, the Rebbe goes through the specifics. The Rebbe in the Mimer actually does go, in the spoken Mimer, the Rebbe goes through the different specific states of reality that are discussed in the beginning of the chapter. Right? Just didn't make it into the edited version. The Rebbe edited that. That's what editing is, right? The Rebbe edited that out. So that's not what I want the Mimer to be about. But the Rebbe did talk about that then. This Mimer not. So here the Rebbe says what? That both the details that are discussed in the Kapitel, but all the more so, the Klolos Hamizmor. But really, and that's what the Rebbe's been focusing on here, the basic idea of the chapter in Tehillim, and what's that? Tefillah L'Moshe. The Tefillah of Moshe, and what's that? Tefillas Osher. That is Tefillas Osher. Val Pia Muva Le'il, based on what we said earlier. Mihamaimer. The inyan ashirus who, that what is a shirus? So we learned that that's gilui atzmas ad ein sof shelamayla misevev. We learned that Moshe Rabbeinu is shaykh to that level of or called atzmus ad ein sof, which is even beyond sevev, right? And is shaykh to what? Atik. What's sevev? Arich. Okay, we learned that. Okay, and the more we learn it and the more we hear it, the more it'll resonate in our brain. It'll just become part of the information we know. Just like we know, we can probably mention, a couple of names of presidents of the United States. You can probably do that. There was a time in your life when you couldn't, but you learned it. Okay, so you can learn this too. Al pi amuv leil mi amaymer de inyan ashiras hu gilui atzmas od ein sof shelamayla misevev. It's a revelation of that level of godly light that's even beyond infinite. V'hashaychus, the tefillas osher, and the relevance of the tefillas osher, the tefillah of the one who is rich. And what's that? What did he pray? Medina Planis, right? There's a Medina, v'yichareva, and it's destroyed, v'hi shelcha. And the Rebbe explained to us in an amazing way that that's the ultimate place where you are to be revealed. Gezor shetibane, decree that it should be built and rebuilt, but rebuilt in such a way that it'll never be destroyed again. Binyan adeyad. Right, that's what the Rebbe taught us earlier in the Maimer. So the inyan of Ashiras, which is this revelation of this very high level of Elokus, La Ashiras he ki bechdei shebinyan malchus. This what's the connection of all this to what's the connection of the revelation of Atzvus Ein Sof to Ashiras? And this is just review, and that's why we're going through this quickly, and then. Whenever we learn again, we'll start from Yesh Leimer. It might be on Zoom, it might be in person, it might be Bezrat Hashem, it'll be Mesa Mashiach. Ki bechdei shebinyan Malchus, in order that the building of Malchus, Hamadina, right, the fixing of that which was brought about, we had mentioned this before, Shvir Sakelim. Malchus was broken, meaning godliness was not being revealed in the way it should be revealed. It's concealed. That it'll be an everlasting building. Hu al yedei, and that's by virtue of the fact that's all just review. That's by revealing this level of godliness that's beyond ever being diminished. Yesh leimar. Now the Rebbe is going to explain all this in the next paragraphs. The Yisr Naor, the greater light, Shanase Bagilui, the Yud Tes Kislev and Yud Beis Tammuz. What level of godly light was drawn down on those two auspicious days? It's bringing into the world, now obviously not completely, because if it were completely, it would have brought about the ultimate geula, but it brought about a certain taste of geula by virtue of revealing in the world that level of light, that's beyond Mamala and Seviv. Okay, now the Rebbe is going to explain that for the most of the rest of the Maimer. I mean, there's only a couple more paragraphs.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. That was an amazing day, huh?
Thank you so much for the lesson.
Daniel, it's a pleasure.
What is
And I look forward to your thank yous because it's so sweet. Your thank yous are very, very special. Your thank yous are very special.
What is the Hamasu?
What? Ma'asar, imprisonment.
Imprisonment? And you were saying that by them being separated from the Chassidim, that was their darkness? It was their pain of being separated?
Their pain was the pain the